Somebody starts speaking and they're on mute, I propose we plant an extra tree. And 3, balance in power and resources and the matter of urgency. All of this needs to be factored into every sustainability conversation or anything dealing with really the pressing global issues of our time. So shifting gears for a moment, we're going to now talk about tech advancement for smart, sustainable cities. We're increasingly seeing public commitments by elected officials to build sustainable communities and smart cities. This smart city innovation is in line with climate goals and can provide actionable insights and data-driven solutions for sustainability improvements that serve the public, while also furthering mobility, livability, all the things that people look to in their communities. Specifically, innovation in cloud and data tech can complement and advance the work of municipal governments through partnerships. So next up, we'll hear about cutting-edge technologies being employed for smart cities and how the data and insights provided can be applied not only for better service delivery and efficiencies, but also for our city and state level climate goals. We're joined by moderator Michael Allegretti. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at Rubicon, Teresa Carlson, President and Chief Growth Officer at Splunk, and Don James, Director of U.S. Sustainability and Environmental Science at Microsoft. Welcome, Michael, Don, and Teresa.
Well, Hannah, thank you so much. And thank you to Concordia. This is my second session of the day. It's going to be the best of the two, just saying. Teresa, Don, thank you so much for your time today. We're going to jump right in. I think we have 25 minutes. We're going to start and stop on time. Earlier today, we spent a lot of time talking about climate action, the way cities can develop climate action plans, and then basically put those plans into action through public-private partnerships. We looked at the foundational elements of those partnerships. It was a great conversation, but where we didn't go was to focus kind of at people's front door, on their street, in their community, about quality of life, about public services, about the rest of what goes on in a city beyond, say, just the gains that one needs to make towards certain environmental goals, like fighting climate change or air quality and things of that sort. So I want to pull back for a moment with both of you and say, from where you both sit, and you sit over so much and so many cities and communities, what are some of the big smart city ideas that you're seeing right now, either at your companies or just generally across the country and the world? What are some of the newest moonshot ideas that are going on?
Don, you want to go first?
I wasn't sure who we were starting with.
Sure.
Yeah, no, so we're at Microsoft, we're doing a lot of work around smart cities from a technology standpoint, and also from a connectivity standpoint. And I think that that's the piece that is very, very important, not just as as a cross enabler of technology with Microsoft. But one of the things that we work on is really through one of our programs called Accelerate. We really work on connecting the pieces that influence that particular type of impact to the citizens within a city or a state. And so one of those things is really just connecting the academic side of things, the entrepreneur side of things, enterprise from the private sector, and innovators, and really being able to demonstrate what this kind of rapid adoption of AI and these kind of emerging technologies, how you can really impact individual neighborhoods, as well as the city as a whole, when it's not just really taken in its bits and parts, but bringing it together so that we can work on worker upskilling, matching the new digital landscape that we're seeing us all kind of enter, and what that means for workers, how this is transforming in the job space, how this is transforming with particular companies, depending on which sector they're involved in, and making sure that we bring all of those pieces together, so that it's not just about adoption of technology, but making sure that the people that support the system within the cities and within the states are able to action that, right? So that companies have people to hire, that folks that are looking for jobs have the technological skill sets to enter into this new workforce. So one of the ways that we see it is not just as a technology enabler across all of these kind of prioritized sectors, but also a way to bring people together and to help folks to be able to take advantage of this new digital landscape.
So Don, would it be fair to say that a contribution Microsoft is making to the future city or the smart city is as a connective tissue between different communities, whether they're pedagogical, academics, entrepreneurs, innovators, or actual physical neighborhoods?
Absolutely, and that's the way we really see ourselves, is this kind of cross industry enabler. And it's not I mentioned all these different pieces. We do absolutely face industries from a private sector and enterprise standpoint, federal government, state and local governments, but also really taking a hard look at the end of this kind of chain, who this really impacts, and making sure that the folks that are genuinely being impacted by this have a stake in how it's being developed. And that is, through this worker upskilling program, and then also within these organizations, within these state and local governments, making sure that folks are being upskilled, and that as the digital landscape is changing, we're able to provide a roadmap for how everyone can be involved.
That's so helpful. Teresa, I want to kick it over to you. I know your company works in big data and data analytics in particular. Tell me your perspective. What are some of the big things that you're seeing, you're doing?
Michael and Don, it's great to be here. I appreciate you guys having me. And I just say Splunk is really deeply passionate about the transformation and power of data. And we know that if our customers, they can't change what they can't see. So they need to be able to have that data and measure it. And if the last year has taught us anything, that data has actually become essential service to accelerate the digital transformation around the pandemic. Everything that we've learned, the acceleration of what we've been able to do with vaccinations, and just understanding what was going on in our world across industries. And just some of the stats which are relevant to what we're talking about on sustainability is in the last year, the internet usage, by the way, has increased by 70%. E-commerce accelerated by 76%. And the digital communication strategies, they've accelerated an average of 6 years over the last year. So that tells you kind of where we are in terms of amassing data and information that are powered by data centers around the world and what they're doing. So one of the key things, of course, is starting at the beginning is cloud computing is one of the top things to help us when it's consolidated together, and you don't have inefficient energy use of data centers, right? Because we know in the federal government, as an example, which I spent a lot of time working with, the average use of a data center for them was about 15 to 20%, which is crazy, right? So when you consolidate into a more, a Microsoft or an Amazon or a Google, when you go into a consolidated model, that really supports and helps that along. But let's talk about how that transcends to cities and what can happen there. So if you talk about data, and we know that we need to understand data, one is with the use of data, they want to make sure that they're efficiently taking advantage of both themselves and for companies that they work with, that they have a sustainable plan, that they're doing things to give back. So if you're working with a managed service provider or a cloud service provider, are they using sustainable models? Are they using green renewables? Are they using solar and wind? So that's one good way. So you just think about that alone, consolidation within states and cities so that they make sure that they're powering things in the right way that helps with efficiency there. But also then let's talk about quality of lives for the citizens. How do they do that? How do they understand it? And I'll give you a quick example for a university that we work with, University of Arizona. They're arguably the size of a very, very small city. And in fact, both of these universities I've worked with over the last few years, which is Arizona State and University of Arizona, who are doing these kind of similar things, which is they have now developed solutions that actually power everything by IoT. They look at more efficient ways on their campus of thinking about water capacity, parking, sewage, waste. So things like that, where they lighting, where lights go on and off. So we are starting to see tooling. And if you think about, I always think about real estate generally being behind buildings. If you think about how efficiently are you building and then taking care of those buildings in a way. And I think cities now are beginning to think through these models in a way to say, okay, how do I do this in a way that protects my citizens, helps my citizens, but I'm more energy and sustainably thinking about what I'm going to do, just that will outlive all of us, right? Because we have to do things that are going to outlive all of us.
Well, Teresa, thank you for that. There's so many places we can go with what you just said, but something struck me. First of all, when you were going through the stats about how we've changed as a society in terms of internet usage and e-commerce, something you probably don't think of intuitively, but now you will, is we've also changed in terms of our waste patterns, right? All the garbage is now at our homes, all of that e-commerce and other things of that sort. The reason I mention that is, at Rubicon, we're a company in the digital waste and recycling space. We partner with cities to improve the way they pick up your trash. And a big thing that we used our data to say to cities is, oh my gosh, you have an enormous waste problem that is showing up in your homes overnight in the middle of a pandemic while your workers are calling in sick because of COVID. So you have fewer trucks and men and women on the road. You have more and more garbage at the household. You have a public health issue that's building up. So for us, there was an ability to use data to help our cities action it in real time in the middle of this public health crisis. And we're very proud that we were able to provide that service. But if you take a step back, ideally, those systems would have been in place in cities across the world and the country before this thing hit. So the reason I'm setting that up is to say there's this trade-off, right? We're here to talk about sustainability today, but what a lot of the things you were talking about, it's really about government efficiency, right? Running more efficient operations that lead to taxpayer savings and also have environmental gains associated with them. The trucks going down the road for fewer miles or shorter routes, there's less carbon emissions and gasoline, et cetera. How did the two of you at your companies position that conversation with government? Is it one about tax savings? Is it one about solving the climate crisis? Or is it something in between?
In my opinion, I think that it's all of the above, right? Because the challenge at hand is not a unilateral challenge, right? It has peaks and valleys. There's all kinds of different facets. It impacts not just the United States, but it is a global challenge. How we respond to it has economic implications, and it has real implications to the quality of life to our citizens, right, and to us as individuals. So it's not. I think that all of those pieces have to be in place. And one of the ways that I like to think about it is when we've had other type of crises, societal crises, health crises, or different types of type of government that required a government response. And one is maybe like the smoking crisis, there was a public health crisis, still is, and how government played a role in in policy and controlling pricing, and then also persuasion, right, to be able to change behavior. And so I look at it like that. I look at the COVID crisis and the climate crisis as being on different time scales of being able to address, whereas the COVID crisis tends to be on the time scale of years. The climate crisis, the way that we are responding, is on the scale of decades. And so the way that that our government, private sector, and the citizens have to work together around policy, pricing, and persuasion to be able to change behaviors is we have to do it together. And so the question is as to how we approach the private sector, and from a commercial standpoint is what you're asking, right? So how do you make the climate crisis make sense from a business strategy standpoint? The way that we talk about it is really that to solve this crisis, we cannot remain in this kind of fixed and vertical mindset, right? We have to scale across all the axes, right? We have to understand from a platform, from a technology perspective, from a platform perspective, how we're going to operate on all these fronts to connect all of the pieces, connect the data, connect the software to the assets, right? And then we have to change how we think about business outcomes, right? It is not just about a winner take all mentality, right? We have to release ourselves from that type of mindset. And we have to change the way that we view employees and workers, with more of a purpose-driven incentive, and having flexibility and incorporating empathy and confidence to be able to enact this type of plan, right? And then, and part of that too is that government piece that you're talking about, and how we incorporate policy, how we change the pricing scheme. So I know that we talk about green premium being added to green products, and how that can then persuade from a citizen standpoint, and also from a shareholder standpoint, to actually drive behavior change. Because what we've learned from the smoking crisis is that there is a price point to change behavior.
You have reframed PPP forever with policy, pricing, and persuasion. Don't think I didn't notice that, Dawn. Teresa, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking, of course, before we got on here, like, how does the side of government drive good or bad behavior, right? Like, what can they do to drive good or bad behavior? And in my career, the one thing I've been working with public sector for 25 years, but I get frustrated because I feel like policy will a lot of times lag behind what we're trying to do, especially in the tech world. And then we're always pushing on them to create the right policies so you can drive new innovations. And I think sustainability, we've got to really be ahead of what we're trying to do on policy setting. And the ways that I think our government could better do this is nothing hits harder than a checkbook. So when they start looking at procurements, what did their procurements say? Do they have words in there that they use and mandates around sustainability? What companies are doing, what their partners and vendors are doing, having not just goals of, what they say, but what they buy themselves and how they consume. So I think just, you can't talk the talk, you've got to walk the walk. Mm-hmm. So if you apply that all the way through from what our policymakers are putting in place, and I love that President Biden has a real push in this. I mean, we're seeing things now like the move, not just from, solar and wind, but also now to nuclear, which I'm hearing that nuclear is going to be powering the next move to the International Space Station. So, over time, we have to figure out what's the most sustainable solutions that we can have, not just in the U.S., but around the world, that are going to really support what we're doing now with data, with technology, with people, and the movements of all that transportation. So I do like the idea, Michael, of companies kind of coming together and making sure that they are providing our government leaders and policymakers with good data and information about what we're seeing, just what you talked about on waste management. It's good for them to see and understand what's actually happening so they can put the appropriate policies together that are flexible and innovative, not just putting them in place for the now, but how do we think about outliving all of this? What does that kind of look like to make sure that we're on the right track? And I'll just kind of one more comment on this is, you talked about waste and the information and how that was so important. And I actually know what you guys do. And I know you do good work actually for cities around the world. But if you think about also where data can power so much of the knowledge that's required for sustainability, one of the big things we've looked at, ransomware has always been a huge issue. But during COVID, ransomware exploded. There were cyber attacks all over the place. Well, again, that can cause real issues. Think about the Colonial Pipeline, the things that actually began to happen to us that changed what we were trying to achieve even in our sustainable goals. So the more that we can understand our data and be able to act and react to it, more act versus react, but sometimes you are in a reactive mode, that also helps us put in place the right information and metrics to drive the goals that we need to be doing. And not just goals, but then how you act. What do you do about it? And all of that blends from the the private sector giving the information back to our government leaders that we know so they can make good policies, and us giving them that continual education. And the final point on this, which I love that Don kind of talked about, we could do so much if we started this in school at elementary, where we start to actually have our children act and behave in a sustainable manner. Everything they do in their school day. And then guess what? It's just how they behave and act. So some of these things you have to teach and train from a very early age, and then add it into the curriculum to make sure that the curriculum actually supplies them the knowledge and information so that they can, as they grow, they can become adults who really understand and care about this and are always doing the right thing.
Teresa, I have to give a shameless plug because you've set it up too well, but we're so proud. We created something called Trick or Trash, where we actually work with schools across the country to recycle candy wrappers at Halloween. And we built a curriculum that's for K through 8 to teach little kids about recycling. Now that's a smart city tech thing, but it is a sustainable thing. The reason I mention it is we're a software company. So why the heck are we doing this? Because we're trying to change long-term behavior and train that next generation to be better recyclers, so that frankly, our technology isn't spent identifying contamination in the recycling stream. It could do something of higher value, which would be identifying how to put certain commodities together to create more circular products.
Yeah, so I love that.
Believe so strongly.
It's like brushing your teeth.
Yeah.
If they learn every day, they're going to kind of do this. So
I want to stay where you were for a moment and do what you're not supposed to do as a moderator, which is go into the weeds for a moment on public policy. How boring. The pathway to take technologies, whether it's Rubicon, Splunk, Microsoft, or anyone else, and get that technology deployed into a city quickly, have it tested, have it tinkered with and changed to meet the needs of the city. I think I speak for the three of us. We want to move like 1,000 miles an hour, and the city wants to move more slowly. It's not their fault. They have a fiduciary responsibility of the citizens. What's the right line here? Are there actual changes that could be made in the process of procurement or process of piloting to help get our stuff into the hands of government more quickly?
Or is that to me or is that to Teresa?
It's to both of you as a final parting thought.
Yeah, no, I think that you do have to be thoughtful in how you apply technology. You have to be thoughtful in how software is being deployed, because as you mentioned, there is a fiduciary responsibility that the government has to its citizens, and it needs to be tested and make sure that if there's any sort of kind of critical functioning that is resting on some type of new software, that it's been tested and vetted and piloted, et cetera. That being said, this isn't our first time doing it. Right. So we certainly have processes in place. We have many, many partners. We have lots of coalitions and strong partnerships in how to scale our solutions. And I think that, it's not, to me, it's not so much of the adoption and scale as much as the end user and the quality of that end user, and making sure that how they're using the software, making sure that they have the data that they need available, that's been QA/QC'd and vetted, so that they are using real information to be able to make real decisions. But then there's also the piece around, and I think I touched on this before, but this digital literacy and equity, right? So as you're talking about education and how this kind of works, I think that the foundation of that is still in how we educate the workforce to come into this new digital landscape, and making sure that that education is not just that literacy, right? The digital literacy is equitably distributed. So any job that you have, any role that you play in within a city government, from the top to the bottom, has some type of digital literacy that can stand to be upskilled. So making sure that everybody has been educated, everyone has access to that education, and that as the technology is deployed and adopted, that everybody has equal opportunity to be able to use and gain powerful insights.
Well, thank you, Dawn. It sounds like starting early. Teresa, the
Michael, I'll do this very quickly. I love you. I've spent the last 12 years of my life doing just that thing. How do I get technology in the hands of government really quickly? One was, I spent the time actually agile procurement processes. So one of the things I love that I was able to work on with the UK government as an example was a cloud computing model where we put companies that were cloud-based. They did this, and we pushed this years ago, but they did it, and it's a model I love, which you could add companies, small companies, Rubicon, large companies, Microsoft Splunk on these procurement vehicles. You got on them, and then they were just sitting there, and a customer in the government could just go buy them. And
Wow.
then every 6 months, they did a refresh so that you could add new features and functionality. And it was one of the best. They were really ahead. They were more cloud native in their thinking in the UK. And it was good because we need more of those things. In the US government and state and local, I think they need to follow. They started doing more things in the US federal, but follow a lead where it's a try, buy, scale model. So they're not making commitments. It's literally a task order that you can get on quickly, and the government has the ability to try it. It's like a marketplace, Michael. And I think having marketplace set up so governments have choice and then try it and scale it is the new model. They shouldn't have to go up with big capital expenses. They really need an operating model where they can try it. And then the proof where you can go back and say within a few weeks or months, look, here's the data. And I do think governments, right, wrong, or indifferent, we've talked about this at Splunk, sometimes governments will use two of the technologies that do the same thing because they want to see what works the best. It's their way of trying to do the right thing for the citizens. Sometimes they may spend too much, but the best way without overspending is that try, buy experience with scale. And then allowing the partner, the vendor, to come back and say, the proof's in the pudding. Now let us show you what we actually accomplished. And I think in a cloud computing world, we were able to change the trajectory of how governments around the world thought about technology and are buying it. So they are on a good path. And I think the models are in place for them to scale them and continue to iterate on them.
I love it. Teresa, thank you. Dawn, thank you. And Concordia, back over to you for our next session. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael, Dawn, and Teresa. Fascinating conversation about the myriad ways that intentional partnerships or kind of really strategic thinking at the city level can help drive forward our sustainability.